Hey, my name is Ben. Thanks for stopping by. We're working on a reach-in freezer here. Not reach-in freezer, walk-in freezer. And this is a 404A unit. We've already confirmed that we don't have any ice on the coil inside. So this unit should be running right now. The thermostat's calling, but it is not running. So it's probably locked out with the low pressure switch and is low on refrigerant, but we'll see what happens here. Oh, what's going on? So it came on for a second. This coil is really hot over here. So we might have a bad condensing fan motor and it's tripping out on high pressure. It's kind of hard to say exactly. This looks like a low pressure switch only though. So it might have a separate high pressure switch. Let's take a look here.
So sometimes there are pressure switches that have both the high pressure and the low pressure in the same control, so I'm looking back in there to see if there is a separate high pressure control, but
let's pull the top off of this thing.
Ultimately decided I need to take the cover off in order to really see.
So all I gotta do is come out here and spin it all the time and it'll run. I fixed it. Yeah, perfect.
So what's happening here is this high pressure switch is cutting the unit in and out because since this fan is not running, the high pressure just goes up and up and up on this coil, and it's super hot here. And so that's why we knew kind of right away that it was not the low pressure switch. Because if your condenser is getting hot, it means you have plenty of refrigerant. So most likely the refrigerant part of the circuit is fine. We might not even have to do anything with that. So we're gonna go get the correct motor to put in this unit and replace that one with the failed bearings. And this unit should be up and running here in no time. Sometimes you can take a little bit of oil and get these things to run a little longer if you need them to. So we might do that. We're back with the new motor.
I will link to the different motor options that you have in the description below as much as I can find them. This particular motor is a universal type motor that can be used on multiple voltages, but you're just looking to make sure that you have the correct RPM and shaft diameter and all that kind of stuff for whatever motor that you do end up using as your replacement. Now just taking this fan blade off of here, I used that ratchet with the Allen wrench. Theoretically, a really long-handled Allen wrench could be a better option. And then since it wasn't coming directly off, I just held that shaft in place while rotating the fan blade a little bit to get it to ultimately pop off. Now a socket would be kind of nice for loosening that bolt, but channel lock works too. And then we're just going to disconnect our existing leads. These are 240 volt motors usually, and so there's two black wires feeding that existing motor, so there's nothing to really keep track of because it doesn't really matter which leg goes to which side on the 240 volt motor. If it's 120 volts, it is going to matter. You'll have a white wire and a black wire usually. Now to get these things out, you usually have to take the entire fan shroud loose that holds that fan motor in place, because there's just usually not enough space to slide the motor out of the bracket without removing that. So it's kind of a pain. Again, a ratchet might speed this process up a little bit. Oh, there, I did eventually find my ratcheting gear wrench, which is nice. It's finally free. So this universal motor is going to have more wires on it than a typical, than the original motor had. You can see how there are also those yellow and orange wires that plug into that little off-white plug. That's for reversing the rotation of the motor should we need to. And then we'll have to just follow the wiring diagram, which is on that little white sticker on the wires or on the side of the motor itself. And that wiring diagram is going to tell us which wires we need to connect together, and basically you have to use different combinations in order to attain whatever voltage you happen to be using with the particular motor that you have. And I probably should have used new wire nuts, but the existing ones seemed good enough apparently, so we're going to use those. You can see how we have the black and the white together, and then the purple and the black. Those are the two legs that are feeding power in.
The yellow.
Now we're just going to connect the black and the orange together and then insulate the yellow wire in order to finish the wiring process for this particular motor. Last thing is the ground wire. We'll just anchor that onto a screw that is nearby. Now just make sure you do a good job with your cable management. Get everything bundled up so that it's not going to be hitting any components that are really hot, or the fan blade or anything like that that could cause damage to them. Also, facing the wire nuts up, if at all possible, is a good idea, just to keep moisture out of those connections. So go ahead and face the motor shaft a direction that you can see it, and then line that set screw up. It's best to just slide it on with the set screw in the correct orientation. It'll usually slide on a lot easier that way. You're just going to position that fan blade in its shroud at approximately where the previous one was. You can always grab your old motor and look at it and see that, or see where it was originally mounted. And again, I'm using my little socket style Allen. Now this right here looks a little bit, I don't know, it's not the easiest way to be able to tell how tight it is. I'm being very cautious and I'm putting very little pressure on it as I tighten that down, just because I want to make sure that I do not over tighten that at all. And you can see right away that that thing spins nice and free compared to what the previous one was doing. Now before I put the top cover on, I'm going to go ahead and turn the unit on so that I can make sure that fan blade is spinning in the correct direction. And you just want to make sure that it's blowing air towards you, or towards us as we're looking at it here. And if it's not, or if it's spinning in the wrong direction, you can just change those two wires, or that little plug, and reverse the orange and the yellow wire, I believe it is. But usually you don't have to. Usually the motors are already set in the correct rotation, since they're a universal motor, so they're going to follow whatever the most common application is. Now as far as oiling the motor goes, I mentioned that earlier, and usually we only do that if it really needs to get going right away, or if we have absolutely no other option. Usually oiling up a motor like that won't last more than a week, and oftentimes it's even less than that motor will make it after it initially fails from the bearings in the motor going bad. Those motors are just kind of designed in such a way that eventually the bearings fail and you just need to replace the motor. So that concludes the process of diagnosing and replacing a bad condenser fan motor in a walk-in freezer. And it's pretty much the same for a walk-in cooler. So those little fan motors go bad, and those are the symptoms where you have the unit turning on and off intermittently. As that coil cools down enough, it will come on, and then it'll overheat and go over pressure, and the high pressure switch will shut it off again. So thanks for watching, and we will talk to you guys in the next one. Right on the screen here.
Almost forgot you there.